Hi, Pat.
Hey, Signe, it's
Uh,
good to see you.
it's good to see you too. You're the curator for the photography exhibition that we're showing currently. So you're the perfect person to talk to today. So I'm so happy that you're here. I understand that you've been doing research at the at Munchmuseet since 1984. Is that right?
I have been on and off since 1984, and I usually spend my summers in Norway, but
Really?
this
Yeah.
is the first one in years that I've been here in Boston.
Do you miss us?
I miss you guys a lot. I miss everything about Norway, and
Yeah.
yeah, there it is. It's COVID time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a pity that you can't be here for this talk, but we'll have to look at the paintings and talk virtually like this instead. We're gonna. We saw a film that Munch did, and he also did photographs. And many people think that his films are a little bit chaotic and random. And also here we see in the photograph, the self-portrait that he did himself in 1930. It's his head is out of focus. Like, what is it that appeals to you with regards to his photography?
Well, I'll say a word or two about his films and then turn to this photograph and his photography in general. I think it's fascinating to watch how he made his little short films. I feel like he used the film camera almost like a paintbrush. Everything's in
Oh,
motion all the time. And I think it may look chaotic to many people, but it's very, very interesting that in the experimental film world, these little tiny clips of film are seen to be really radical, really
yeah,
experimental.
yeah,
So it's kind of fascinating to see how he used his eye and how he used his hand as he was looking out at space. And in the photographs too, I'm really fascinated by the fact that so many of them are self-portrait photographs, and in many of them, he's almost like a ghost. He's parts of him you see through, as you do in this photograph. You can see right through his head to a painting that he has adhered to the wall behind him. And that probably began when he first picked up a camera in 1902, seeing himself sort of moving across the screen or across a photograph, and then began to exploit that as an effect because it's fascinating. It goes against everything that photography, amateur photography, was supposed to be at the
exactly,
time.
exactly. Because this is taken in 1930, and he'd already had quite a bit of experience as a photographer starting out in 1902. So you'd think he had learned how to focus his camera and do the timing correctly so that everything was in focus. But so it's on purpose. That's what you think?
Well, I kind of see his use of a little handheld camera in the same way that he made woodcuts or lithographs or even used paint, which was to kind of understand what the rules were and then flaunt them and then really think about what the capacities might be of his media that hadn't been touched before or that, offered results which were unexpected.
Right,
And so
right.
surely in 1930 he's planted himself in this chair. It's really a staged image. I also like to think, or I imagine that he used a mirror
Hmm.
to position himself because of course with our smartphones we can see exactly where we are and we can see pictures immediately,
Hmm.
but he wouldn't be able to see this until the prints came back from a commercial printing place in 1930.
Right, right. Let's turn to one of the photographs that he did of himself nude, because there are some photographs here of him posing nude. And was that to document his health, do you think?
I think possibly sometimes it was. This
Hmm.
in this one, it's obviously such a staged heroic position, sort of planted with his arm up, and you know, um,
Yeah, what is he holding, do you think?
I don't know. I think we have no idea. It looks like there are scratches or images across the surface of the print, and it kind of looks like he could be holding a sword or something like that as he stands among the trees. There's actually a quote. Can I read you a quote, which I
Sure.
love? So he said, in reference to perhaps this print or other nude self-portrait photographs. When I saw my body photographed in profile, he wrote, I decided after consulting with my vanity to dedicate more time to throwing stones, throwing the javelin, and swimming. And,
Right.
when we think about the public figure of Munch and we think about, a painting like The Scream or others that seem to be, symbolic of his practice, we don't think about a person who suddenly decides he's got a paunch, like all of us, like the
Right.
rest of us who
Right.
decide to go to the gym on January 1st, right?
Right. Yeah. So he was even him was concerned. Even he was concerned with how he appeared in the photographs that he took.
Of course.
Yes, of course he did. Munch also photographed his friends in the garden in Åsgårdstrand, and he had a house in Åsgårdstrand, and had his friends come over in the summer, and that's when they took this photograph. So, what is the circumstance for it? Because it is a little bit of an occasion that this photograph was taken for.
I like the way you put that. It's kind of an occasion. So this summer of 1904, when he painted, there's a painting that you see in the background, right? A large scale painting, and we'll take a look at that painting in a moment, if that's okay. But let's look at this little photograph first. So there's a painting, and he's standing with friends, with two other people in front of this painting. And the sun is pouring down, and actually the sun is pouring through the branches of a tree, and you can see the shadows of the tree on the upper left corner of the painting, and it almost looks as though there's a tree painted in the painting. It's not there. So during the summer of 1904, he had invited some friends to spend time with him. And if you can bear this, I'm going to read another quote to you, because I find this, I find it kind of charming. It's as though for a brief period of time, he kind of started a health resort at his home. And let me find it. So he wrote a postcard to actually one of the people who's represented in the photo, or this particular photograph. It's dated July 12th, 1904. And Munch wrote that he was referring to his schedule, the daily schedule of his friends, and he referred to them kind of parodically. He called them the gods, that the gods awakened at 5:30, and the gods ate breakfast, and then he said engaged in a kind of a sequence of athletics in half-hour increments. So every half hour it included boxing, swimming, sunbathing, and then he says they dedicated 2 hours to painting, and then swam, boxed, and threw rocks in order to develop bigger muscles. Okay? So the occasion is that during this period of time, he and a group of friends, and also he wrote a lot about what he was eating. So they were eating really healthy foods, but it's like a kind of a spa. So eating natural foods, working out in the morning, and then he'd paint. And his friends apparently modeled for him. So what we see on this, as you call it, an occasion, are potentially some of the people who were modeling for that painting. And then there's the painting. And so, of course, they're clothed in the foreground and they're unclothed in the painting.
As you can see in the photograph, the painting is huge. It's life size. It's the same size as the men standing in front of it. And it shows frontal nudity. Was this at all controversial at the time?
Well, it was. It's, when you think about the history of Western art, it's so common to see naked women bathing or as mythological figures, but we don't sort of question female nakedness in Western art.
No.
But when men were represented naked or nude, it was always in the guise of a sort of a classical god or a religious figure. There was always some kind of way of making a naked male body legitimate, right? Very often. And so to just be kind of naked, hanging out, facing the painter and being painted just in your daily activities and just kind of banal activities, hanging out at the beach, that was new. And it was a kind of a widespread practice in Northern Europe. At the turn of the 20th century, there arose a real interest in, and we can talk about this a little bit as well, in in bathing, in naked bathing, in being outdoors in the sun and getting a suntan, thinking that nature would kind of revitalize your body. And in some contexts, when this painting was shown and other paintings by Munch and other artists of naked men, no big deal. But in some contexts, the paintings caused, a bit of a stir.
Yeah.
Because male frontal nudity isn't always appreciated. And do you see the figures? There are two males that are standing off to the right, together, very close. And one of the men has his, or boys, youths, has his dark suntanned or, red hand against the thigh of the other young man. And I find that a fascinating gesture too, because on the one hand, it's maybe friendship, it seems very highly erotic. But the fact that the hand is painted so darkly against the pale background of the bodies, it's something we're supposed to pay attention to. So there's a lot to read into, and a lot of different ways of looking at all of this flesh melding together, the flesh turning into something else in the water. That bathing isn't just a daily activity. It's not just a bunch of people swimming, but there's something almost occult about it. Some ways in which nature itself kind of takes over and does something to your body that's beyond comprehension.
There's a lot of nude bodies in art history after 1900, and what is the reason for this increase? Why are artists interested in painting the male and also the female nude in this period?
I guess there's so many different reasons for that, Signe, but one of the things I think about is the rise of sports, actually. The daily occurrence of sports in the lives of people in industrialized places. The rise of leisure activity as with industrialization, a lot of great things happen and some terrible things happened, overcrowding, factory labor, substandard housing, and there was so much anxiety, particularly in cities throughout the industrialized world, about bodies that were degenerating and disintegrating under the pressure of urbanization and in these substandard environments. And with the recognition that tuberculosis could be cured by sunlight and fresh air, once we realized that these were, bacillus that carried diseases, being outdoors, exercising your body, eating well, it's what we do now to try to stay healthy, was a big, broad social movement.
Right.
And so because we weren't seeing all these bodies behaving in the same way across social classes before, this began to enter into visual culture broadly.
Munch spent a few years in Warnemünde, a coastal town in the northern part of Germany on the Baltic Sea. And it is known for its beach and for the bathing culture there. Why was Munch attracted to this place?
So when Munch located himself in Warnemünde, he had been for some years really experiencing a lot of health issues. And he actually experienced a lot of health issues lifelong. Had weakened lungs from, in part, a childhood illness. He had been suffering from pain from various sources up to and including, kind of famously in his life, in 1902, in a lover's tussle, pistol went off and wounded one of his hands grievously. And that pain never left. And then his career picked up in those first years of the 20th century. He traveled so much. He was holding so many exhibitions. He was enormously productive. And he began using alcohol as a way of managing, I think, both the pain, certainly, as he's written about, and the stress. So between the bodily pain, illness, and his use of alcohol, he sometimes sought treatment to try to make himself healthy again. In Warnemünde and the beautiful windswept beaches along the Baltic coast were places where a lot of people went to try to heal their bodies. That's a long answer to a short question.
And let's look at the painting itself that's in the background of this photograph. It shows bodies in sunlight and on the beach. But what does the painting say about this period? Does it say anything about the period?
Well, I think it does say a lot about the period. It says a lot about Munch. It says a lot about us, I think. But as we were speaking before, this desire for health and this desire to be in the sea and in the sun, the desire for health, the use of the beach as a kind of a staging area, both for athletics and leisure, but also to see and be seen. All of that, it seems to me, is really encapsulated. And what I find very interesting, another element that Munch included is the figure at the bottom left-hand corner who seems to be intruding on the scene, um, right? And looking at the other figures. So it's as though one of us has kind of merged with the painting and we're walking forward into the scene. So it's so much about looking as well as flexing.
This painting has been connected to vitalism, and Munch in this period, his work in this period has been connected to vitalism. Can you talk about a little bit more about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, vitalism is a term that has been given actually to a lot of the work in this period, whether it's writings in philosophy and literature, in visual culture. It intersects with the reform movement, and it is this idea that humans don't live outside of nature, that we're not intellectual beings who can rationalize and instrumentalize nature as we had been doing in the 19th century, but we're actually part of nature. We're part of a grand natural sort of consciousness, and that all living things are related through a kind of a vital fluid,
Right.
and that human bodies maybe aren't as bounded as we think that they are. And so it was a philosophical orientation around the beginning of the 20th century to sort of renaturalize the body and to really give a sense of vitality to
Right.
nature. And it's fascinating because it moved across the political spectrum from the far left, as the reform movement did, to thinking about how to help and protect the most vulnerable people on the planet and provide health and sustenance. And it went also to the very far right and began to be a kind of a place where later fascist movements began to mine some of their theories.
And let's look at this painting from 1918, and that was quite a unique moment in time if we think of the history. Everything that happened, the World War was coming to an end, and then it has parallels with what we're experiencing today with the pandemic.
Yeah, it was an incredible historical moment. And of course, on the one hand, one way to look at this painting is that it is part of this large string of bathers of both men and women that Munch produced over the course of several decades. But as you say, the Great War, we didn't know about it as it wasn't a First World War yet. There hadn't been a second one. But the Great War, in which Norway had been neutral, but of course had participated through its merchant ships, and there had been losses, but it was a huge trauma throughout Europe, throughout the world. And there are these figures out in the sunlight at the end of this catastrophe, and Munch could not have known what was going to happen just a few months hence.
Yeah,
right, with the rise of what was called the so-called Spanish flu, this pandemic in which there were three really horrifying and significant waves, and which decimated Norway as well as it decimated the rest of the world. And so when I look at this painting now, there's so many things about it that I love. I love the fact that this large central figure is looking down into the water, and anybody who's ever gone walking on the rocks on the coast of Norway know that you have to watch your feet all the time. You don't want to be cut by rocks or mussel shells. So he's carefully moving himself through the water.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
a little bit like you could say it's like Narcissus. Maybe he's looking at his own self, but it's a very common, it's a very banal kind of common posture. And then, again, like the painting you just showed, the little sketch in Warnemünde, there are teeny tiny little figures that we also
Yep,
see in this composition. In the far distance. So, and the water itself is like this weird, the more you look at it, the more abstract and just flowing it is. It's just a whole lot of paint that has its
exactly,
own kind of life.
exactly.
So it is it's every single part of the composition is activated. And after this grand, political catastrophe in which so many lives were lost, and Munch actually commented on that in his writings and some of his other paintings too, of understanding this sort of bloodbath. It's such a it's so many ways it's kind of a utopian
Hmm.
representation. I also, I know we've talked about this before too, but I love the pink rocks, the
Yes.
big pink outcropping.
Yeah, in the background behind the man's head. Yeah.
It looks like a very large, well, rump, right? It has this bodily, the more, I mean, of course, this is my projection, but I guess once I say it, you can't unsee it. But it does look
Hmm.
like a giant body part.
How do you think Munch's images of bathers are relevant to us today in 2020?
I can think of three things, Signe. One, it tells us a lot about Munch as we look back at him, and his desire for health and his interest in health. It tells us a lot about history if we really start to look and think about the circumstances and the context in which these paintings were made, but also it gets us to reflect on our own experience. I
Right.
mean, right now, so many of us worldwide are locked up, and there's something, both liberating and poignant about looking at Munch's images of bathers, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Um, Thank you so much, Pat, for talking to me today. It's been
Thank
really
you for
nice.
Signe, thank you. It's just wonderful to speak with you.
Yeah.
Always a delight.
I hope the situation with the pandemic will be different next year and that you will come and see us in person.
I'll look forward to that moment. I think, as the rest of the world will look forward to that moment.
Yes.